All right. The time is currently 12:17 a.m. in the morning on December 18th, 2025. In truth, this was an entry that should have gone up yesterday. But unfortunately, I'm having to redo it since I actually got interrupted twice. So, but what was yesterday's entry about? I believe within the last couple entries that I had made, I had talked about briefly depression and having had it. Back in December of 2023, I had a really bad period of time with it. I drank a lot, had a lot of bad thoughts, and there was, honestly speaking, some days where, when taking in a lot of liquid, that I genuinely did not care if I had waken up the next day or not. And it took a long while to get over that. Or at least what I had thought. No. It took me a long while to get past that period of time in my life. Like about half a year's worth. And when I thought, or when I had gotten through it, I thought that I had honestly just been done with it. When in reality, that's just not the case. Although it's been fairly minor, within recent weeks, I've found myself not necessarily relapsing, but having moments where I succumb to deep, intense moments of depression. And, it's caused by intense feelings of loneliness, disconnection from others. And a thing which had heavily triggered it, at least in terms of last night, was that I had joined on an individual in VR who I had a crush on back in 2024. Now, when I say crush, I mean it in the context of I had an interest in a person because of how they acted in VR. They seemed to have interesting and a unique personality, and I wanted to get to know them better. However, due to them never really reciprocating any of the energy or investment which I had put into them, I decided to take a step back, which, long run, I do think was the wise decision. Now, when I had joined on said crush, or at this point it's more of an ex crush, or ex interest, I should say, they were on blue status, and I thought, I may as well check in just because it's currently easy to join on them and just see how they're doing. When I joined on them, though, I noticed that they were cuddling with another individual. At which point, I felt disappointment. Not anger, not jealousy, but disappointment. Which poetically also gave me a bit of closure, emotionally speaking. Although I guess that's basically all that closure is. It's for the emotions. But why did I feel disappointment? My interest from 2024 was an individual who, when they told me a bit of their backstory, they had been single for a while after their ex-partner, who I think was their first partner, had passed away. And said ex-partner had passed away due to self-deletion. And so I remember 2024 and my interest from 2024. I remember them telling me that sometimes it's better to be alone than to be with someone and risk heartache, which in of itself is an argument to make. You know, but then fast forward a period of time later, short period of time, I want to say, she started dating a new dude who is very flirtatious, you know, and the two of them seemed to get along fairly well. But right before that point, I was told by another friend of mine that, you know, she wasn't looking for anything serious. She was just looking for male attention. And it was after I heard that, I decided to take a step back since, you know, if I'm going to invest in a person, I want there to be equal reciprocation, you know. I want to get to know a person. I would like them to be interested in getting to know me as well. Even if it's not even for the purpose of dating or anything like that. When I take interest in a person, it's just simply for the matter of, hey, you seem like a interesting individual. I would like to hang out, get to know you better. But as I just said, after hearing that they were only looking for attention, I decided to take a step back, deeming that they were not worth my time at that moment in time. And then shortly after, they got their first boyfriend, or they got a boyfriend for the first time in a while. And as I said, the dude, he was flirtatious, but he also seemed very well-mannered and kind, and overall seemed like a chill dude. Well, I found out that as time went on, you know, that trouble was in paradise, or at least what was perceived as paradise between the two. And from what I had been told, he was a very good boyfriend, you know, loyal, giving, talking about the future, all that. And she apparently had just missed hanging out with, I guess, gooner friends or something, where she missed hanging out with people who just gave her attention. So the two of them break up. I forgot who initiated it, but the two of them broke up. And, you know, for a while she had seemed depressed. At least that was the interpretation which I had gotten off her Discord statuses. And, you know, I reached out saying, hey, you know, hope you're doing all right. Commented on her status, Again, trying to be an individual who showed genuine care and concern. And one of the things that I find most poetic was that within the last few months, she had not put up a status, but in a small text conversation I had with her, she had said that she was tired of no one seemingly caring about things that were going on in her life. And so I told her, for what it is worth, I do care. And I would be sad if you left for in one way or another. She never replied to that. And I remember from a while back, from someone who was also friends with her, but now has also taken a step back from her, that she was someone who had fairly high standards. And even her ex-boyfriend, who I'm friendly with, even he had stated that she had high standards. And yet, when I see her now with this guy who she was cuddling, and the two are dating, essentially. Not even essentially, they are dating. I found nothing but disappointment. And again, it wasn't anger, I wasn't jealous or anything like that as much as it was I was given a portrayal of an individual, and for all I knew, they could have been lying. What people were saying about her and whatnot, having high standards or whatever. But even by her own words, to say that it's better to remain single than risk heartbreak. To give up someone who was loyal to you because you were looking for attention. For other people, multiple people, to say that you had high standards for dating. To then just move on from a loyal boyfriend to somebody else. From where I currently stand and from what I know and believe, to me, that doesn't speak of high standards. To me, that just speaks of someone who they will shift and adjust what their desire is to meet a current short-term need. Which, I could be wrong. But circling back to the original point, the disappointment I had in that moment started making me feel a tad bit depressed again. Right? Now, my depression stems from a few things. The biggest one is that it stems from loneliness. If I see a friend of mine in a big crowd with a whole bunch of people, and if I feel like I'm genuinely being ignored or invisible, that causes me to be depressed. If I see people being romantic with each other to the point of exclusion of other people around them, that causes depression in me. Or that just causes depression to flare up. I believe in the entry I had right after Thanksgiving, I had talked about how I had learned to grow comfortable with being by myself. And that point still remains true. However, being the social creature that I am, just because of the fact that I am capable of feeling and being comfortable alone, doesn't mean that I don't have social needs. Because again, human beings, we are social creatures. We desire connection, we desire companionship. And even with my current interest that I met this year, you know, said person is taken by another individual. Do I ever expect myself to have a chance with this individual? Hell no. it's just not happening. And I don't say that from a pessimistic point of view as much as I do just it's being realistic. They're together with somebody, you know, I don't spend nearly enough time with them. If anything, right now, if I were to, quote unquote, desire to date them, it would be because of the fact that I'm currently in love with a potential idea of who this person could be if they were to be in my life. And that is a major distinction which a lot of people nowadays don't know how to identify when it comes to a relationship. A lot of people fall in love with the idea of a person and the potential of who a person could be instead of who the person actually is. And it's tough. And it's not even from a romantic or a romance perspective or standpoint that's even causing me to have flare-ups with depression again. There are other individuals who, I seem to mesh well with, just even friendship-wise, that I'm just afraid of losing said connection. I said before that I've been on VR for easily the last 7, nearly 8 years. And I've had dozens of individuals who I emotionally was connected to and emotionally attached to who've just since exited my life. And when that just becomes a repeating pattern over and over and over again, whenever, even the smallest indicator or sign of the cycle starts up again, you start becoming afraid that history is just going to repeat. And, even with people who I've chatted to, who I chat with every now and again, even they have said at this point that they don't blame me for feeling cynical. They don't blame me for feeling just utterly beaten and defeated when it comes to connections, especially on VR chat. And sure, I'm sure that a lot of other people would say, well, if you want a connection, just go out to a bar. Go out to the gym, go out to the library. But here's a little problem with that. Going to the bar to find connections may not be the wisest thing to do. Because, people who go to the bar, would they really have the same type of values as me? And for all I know, they're just hanging out with their friends. And if you want to say I'm potentially afraid of rejection, sure. Yeah. Why am I going to go waste my time going out to a bar just to potentially interact with people who may not want to even be interacted with? It would be a waste of time. And it would be no different than me constantly going to public worlds, waiting, trying to make connections, or trying to, I should say, force a connection with an individual who I don't know. And it's just, at least in my mind, it's no different from chasing a short-term high, you know? Now, going to the gym to find a connection. Well, that, for the most part, really wouldn't work either. Because, people go to the gym, they go there to work out. That's what they're there for. Sure, some might be looking for a connection, but they're just there to do their own thing. That's why they're at the gym, to work out, to get fit, to get healthy. And the library, well, I don't really care for books. And again, people who may go to the library, they are just there to read books. And if you have to force a connection, or if you're trying to force a connection, it's probably not going to end up well. My closest friends right now, and it's very few and in between, let me tell you. But right now, my closest friends are people who just happen to be in, for lack of a better way of putting it, just a similar area as me. We just happen to be around each other at the right place, at the right time, chatting, hanging out, gaming, and, we would then see each other afterwards, be like, oh, hey, it's like, you want to run another match of this game? Or, hey, it's like, what's been going on? Like, how did that thing go that you were talking about before? It wasn't forced. It was just natural connection. But fortunately, I don't feel any depression flaring up tonight. Do I worry that it's going to continue flaring up? Definitely. Since the last time I had a major depression wave, or phase, I should say, I had new shot records back to back in 3 weeks of each other. Spent a lot of money on booze too, which was not for the best. But I am afraid of getting back to that point. And the thing that's honestly helped me, ironically enough for the most part, for the longest while at least, was just, staying off of VRChat and just grinding out a video game. But even then, that distraction and escape, it can only last you for so long. And I think it was 2024. I have finally gotten why some people use, alcohol or even drugs to escape depression. Because when life just gets you so beaten down, the only thing you can think of just is escaping that pain, that mental pain, even if just for a little bit. I currently have addictions because of the fact that I feel lonely a lot of the time. And because of the fact that I'm also single. I have addictions where, or I have addictions in which I am not proud of them. And if I had a better and healthier avenue of meeting some basic mental needs, I would not take part in those addictions anymore. But I do it because it's my brain trying to cope with what it's lacking. You know, it's like someone who doesn't or isn't able to get a lot of food into their system within a long period of time. And they get like little scraps here or there. Excuse me. But, you know, for someone that's hungry or is always hungry, like, I could imagine them, you know, daydreaming about succulent feasts. You know, maybe plates filled with nicely cooked steak or delicious soup. You know, foreign dishes that just help fill the belly because of the fact that they're craving something that they're currently lacking and needing in life. I don't know. All I know right now is that I am afraid of going back to using alcohol as a means of trying to numb the pain and trying to escape it. Aside from the fact that it's bad for my wallet, it's not healthy. And unfortunately, ever since December of 2023, I have done other things to help cope with pain. Things that are not healthy at all. But I would say you have to do what you gotta do sometimes, except in this instance, that's not something I want to say. I mean, it's definitely easier to stave off certain actions which I've done in the past just because I've gotten past that time in my life. You know, I managed to get through it once. And, you know, one of my philosophies is that if you're able to get through something once, you're able to do it again. First time is always going to be the worst. And the second may not be as fun, but you at least have some idea of what you can do to help yourself through that time when, you know, it does rear its head again, if it does. And believe me when I say I am doing what I can to prevent myself from repeating some unhealthy choices and unhealthy habits. The temptation is definitely there. Fortunately, the actual action of doing said habit and unhealthy choices has not been. And I've been very fortunate in that regard. And bear in mind, and I've said this before, I do not live the worst possible life. I currently live at home with my family, saving money. I'm not in debt or anything like that. I'm able to put food on the table. My family is fortunately very supportive. And, in hearing that, one may ask or even argue, well, if you're facing depression, why not talk to your family about it? And the truth of the matter is, I feel embarrassed to even discuss something like that with them. As silly as it might sound. Maybe I should. But currently, I do not feel comfortable doing so. Which in of itself, I don't think is inherently a bad thing to not feel comfortable telling your family something like that. Because if it doesn't go the right way, you just open yourself up to vulnerability, and now you got to live with whatever consequences that there is with it. Especially at such close physical proximity. And even with close friends that I have, I don't want to dump that kind of burden on them. Even as much as they care, you don't want to use, or at least you don't want to try to use people as emotional dumpsters. And maybe I'm just speaking from past experience of, having made that mistake with other individuals and then there being consequences for that. Because it does happen. Where you think you can trust in an individual and trust that they'll be there to support you, and then they just turn their back because they just get tired of your shit. I still remember midway through 2024, or it was like a third through 2024, like maybe March or April, talking to a good friend of mine on Xbox about the whole drinking situation that I was in. Drinking phase. And the first immediate thing they had said to me was, I'm going to let this slide. Not because it's not serious, but because of the fact that I trust that this is something that's not going to last a very long time. And that it's just a phase that you're going through. And just hearing that level of sympathy from a good friend of mine, it felt very validating. More so than other people from this platform who said that they were concerned. Meanwhile, whenever I had done something to cope with pain and, not ingesting alcohol, they had done nothing but judge and shame me and criticize me for it. Meanwhile, they themselves were doing nothing to offer help. Aside from saying, oh, hey, you should talk to a therapist. Which in of itself is not a bad thing. However, in my specific case, at this point, I would say that any issues I have need actual solutions and not band-aid solutions. I equate it to a situation of, oh, hey, you have a limb that's no longer there and you're starting to bleed out, you know? You can put band-aids on it all you want, but unless you solve the root core of the issue, which is like, hey, you're actually bleeding to death, you're not going to get better. And honestly, maybe that's not, I don't even know if that's my best analogy, but you kind of get the point. Or unless you solve the root core of the issue, band-aid solutions are not going to help you. They're good for the short-term symptoms, but for the long term, no. And as I say with every video entry, I don't know if anyone ever watches or will watch this, but for anyone who's currently fighting depression and loneliness, just please know you're not the only one going through it alone. I go through it. I know several people who go through it who are struggling, fighting inner demons. And my only hope for anyone who's currently going, or my current hope for anyone who's currently struggling is I do hope that you are able to find someone who you can at least talk to if need be. Not going to say a therapist, just because I currently have a bit of a personal grudge with that recommendation, just because of several details which I'm not going to get into. But yeah, just know that you're not alone in what you're facing. So, and if I could give you any sort of advice, try not to think about, where you're going to be 5 days from now or even a month from now. What I found easiest for me to do, especially when it comes to depression and loneliness, take it one day at a time. And even then, if that's too much, just take it 1 hour, if not 1 minute at a time. There's no shame in saying that you were able to, get through a period of 10 minutes feeling some certain way, or even an hour. Every person struggles with something. And how they feel, people feel what they feel. And you're allowed to feel what you feel. I think one thing I'm going to end off, last thing I'm going to end, the last thing I'm going to say before ending off this entry is, it is okay to feel your emotions. It is okay to allow yourself to feel depressed. It is okay to allow yourself to feel down, to feel defeated. Life is a struggle. But just know that while it's okay to allow yourself to feel and struggle with something, It's what you do with those emotions that matters. The easiest example I can give in terms of what I'm talking about, if there is an individual who you're interested in and they're interested in another individual and you feel jealous about it, you are allowed to feel jealous. It's a human emotion, right? And maybe it's because of the fact that, you haven't experienced that type of thing before, which is okay. That's life. You live, you learn, you grow. However, while feeling jealousy in of itself isn't a bad thing, and allowing yourself to feel it so that you can figure out how to get through it, while that's not a bad thing itself, what you do with that feeling matters. If because of jealousy you decide to lash out at individuals, that's not okay. If because of jealousy you start, shutting yourself down, I mean, well, at least if you shut yourself down, you're not harming yourself or anybody else. So, but allow yourself to feel. But just be careful where you redirect that energy, is honestly, I think, the best way of phrasing it. And we're now closing in at 42 minutes. This is definitely a lot longer than I thought it was going to be, but I don't regret it. And I know that I've been bouncing back and forth with topics and just bringing up random points, but it's just something that's on my mind. So, and also, spoiler alert, I am ADHD, so thoughts typically just bounce back and forth, come and go. I'll have a thought that just kind of cuts in front of the line because it feels like it's more important than what's going on with other thoughts right now. So it happens. What can you do? But hopefully, to anybody else who's struggling, if they do see this helps them out at least somewhat a little. Until next century.